The silence that surrounded your name has just begun to lose its power, and almost no one realizes why. Somewhere beyond your sight, pieces that never seemed connected have quietly found each other, and what once looked like an unfinished story is beginning to reveal a truth no one expected. This is not the kind of moment that arrives with loud voices or dramatic entrances. It arrives gently, almost unnoticed, until suddenly everything makes sense. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you, and every passing moment is leading to a realization that has been waiting far longer than you know. There were days when people accepted the easiest version of your story instead of searching for the honest one. They listened to assumptions because assumptions required no effort. They repeated opinions because opinions felt safer than questions. Yet all this time, the truth remained patient. It never argued. It never chased anyone. It simply waited for the right moment, and that moment has finally begun to unfold. Someone who had stayed silent for longer than anyone imagined could no longer carry the weight of what they knew. They understood that every unanswered question had quietly placed another burden on your shoulders. They remembered conversations others had forgotten. They remembered expressions that did not match the accusations. They remembered details that never fit together the way everyone insisted they did. Little by little, those forgotten memories became impossible to ignore. What happened next surprised even the people who believed they already understood everything. A single conversation changed the atmosphere in a room where certainty had lived for far too long. No shouting was needed. No argument was won. Instead, calm words carried a kind of honesty that could not be pushed aside. One truth led to another, then another, until the picture everyone trusted began to fall apart. Stay till the end, because the most meaningful part of this journey has not appeared yet. The person speaking did not try to defend you with emotion alone. They simply revealed what had always been there but had never been fully seen. Hidden details. Forgotten moments. Quiet observations. Every sentence became another light shining into places where misunderstanding had lived for too long. Those listening could no longer look away. One face slowly changed. Then another. Confidence turned into reflection. Reflection turned into silence. And inside that silence came something many believed would never happen, the painful realization that you had carried a weight that never truly belonged to you. No one expected evidence to feel so human. It was not only papers, memories, or forgotten conversations. It was the unmistakable feeling that everything finally fit together the way it always should have. Every missing piece seemed to find its place naturally. The story they once repeated with certainty no longer made sense. The version of you they had created could no longer survive beside the truth standing quietly before them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Sometimes the loudest change begins with absolute silence. In that silence, hearts began asking questions that pride had refused to ask before. What if they had judged too quickly? What if kindness had been mistaken for weakness? What if the one they doubted had been carrying quiet integrity all along? Those questions became impossible to escape. And then something happened that no one in that room had prepared for. The person who revealed everything looked at them one final time and shared one small detail that had never been mentioned before, a detail so simple, so undeniable, that every remaining doubt disappeared in an instant. Some lowered their heads. Some covered their faces. Some could not hide the tears that came without warning. Not because they had been defeated, but because they suddenly understood how deeply the truth had been delayed. Yet even this was not the end. Because hidden among everything that had just been revealed was one final piece, one quiet discovery that explained why this misunderstanding lasted so long in the first place. And when that final truth comes into the light, nothing about your story will ever be seen the same way again. Not every turning point announces itself with noise. Sometimes it begins with a single heartbeat that feels heavier than every word spoken before it. The room had already changed, yet no one was prepared for what followed next. The evidence had answered many questions, but it had also uncovered a deeper one that no one had dared to ask until now. Why had the truth remained hidden for so long when the signs had always been there? Stay till the end, because the answer to that question reveals far more than anyone expected, and something important is waiting for you just beyond this moment. The person who had spoken looked around carefully, not searching for approval, but searching for understanding. They knew this was no longer about proving you right. It had become about helping others see what they had missed. One by one, memories began returning to those who had once been so certain. Small conversations they had ignored. Gentle moments they had dismissed. Quiet acts of kindness they had forgotten because they never seemed important at the time. Now every forgotten memory carried new meaning. It became impossible to deny that your actions had always told a different story than the one people chose to believe. You never rushed to defend yourself because you trusted that truth does not lose its strength simply because it takes longer to arrive. While others searched for louder voices, the truth remained calm, waiting for the moment when open hearts would finally recognize it. One person quietly admitted, "I remember something now." Another nodded before speaking at all. Then another. Suddenly the room was no longer filled with opinions. It was filled with reflection. Every new memory became another piece of the picture that had been hidden in plain sight. No one realized how many pieces existed until they began fitting together naturally. Don't skip, because what happened next was more powerful than anyone imagined. Someone reached for an old letter that had been overlooked for what felt like forever. It was never considered important because no one believed it held any answers. But today, every line carried unexpected weight. Every sentence echoed with quiet honesty. As they read it aloud, the atmosphere shifted once again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was something much deeper, the unmistakable feeling that the truth had finally found its voice. Eyes that once carried doubt now held something entirely different. Compassion replaced suspicion. Understanding replaced assumption. The distance people had placed between themselves and you suddenly felt impossible to justify. They began realizing that while they had moved on with their lives, you had continued carrying a misunderstanding you never created. The tears that appeared were not only for what had happened. They were for the time that could never be returned. For the moments when simple kindness could have changed everything. For the opportunities to listen that had quietly slipped away. Sometimes people do not cry because they discover the truth. Sometimes they cry because they finally understand the cost of ignoring it. Yet the greatest surprise had not been spoken. The one who revealed everything paused before sharing one final observation. They explained that there was another witness, someone who had remained completely unnoticed because they believed their voice would never matter. That person had watched every important moment unfold without realizing they were holding the final missing piece. As soon as their name was mentioned, every face turned with quiet anticipation. The silence returned. Not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence that appears when everyone knows they are only moments away from hearing the one detail capable of changing the entire story forever. No one expected the quietest person in the story to become the one who carried the clearest memory. While others searched for dramatic moments, this witness remembered ordinary ones, the kind that most people overlook. Yet it is often the ordinary moments that reveal the extraordinary truth. As they slowly began to speak, every sentence felt like another window opening, letting light reach places that had remained in shadow for far too long. Stay till the end, because this part of the journey uncovers something that changes not only how others see you, but how your entire story is remembered. The witness never raised their voice. They simply described what they had seen without adding anything that did not belong. They remembered your patience when frustration would have been easier. They remembered your calm when confusion surrounded you. They remembered the quiet decisions you made that no one applauded because no one was paying attention at the time. Piece after piece, their words formed a picture so clear that it became impossible to return to the old version of events. Those listening exchanged thoughtful glances. It was no longer about deciding who was right. The truth had already answered that question. Now they were beginning to understand something even more meaningful, that first impressions can sometimes become walls, preventing people from seeing what has been in front of them all along. One person gently whispered, "How did we miss all of this?" No one answered. Because everyone was asking themselves the very same question. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you, and what happened next became the moment people would quietly remember long after the conversation ended. Another forgotten item was placed on the table. It was small, almost ordinary, something that had never seemed worth a second look. Yet when its story was finally explained, every earlier misunderstanding began connecting in ways no one had imagined. It didn't introduce a brand new truth. Instead, it confirmed every truth that had already begun to surface. The room felt different now. Not because the atmosphere had grown heavier, but because honesty has a quiet way of changing everything without demanding attention. For the first time, people stopped asking what had happened to you and began asking what you must have felt while carrying a story that wasn't yours. Their perspective shifted from judgment to understanding. They realized that while they had only experienced moments of confusion, you had lived through the entire journey. There was a long pause. Not an uncomfortable one. A grateful one. It was the kind of silence that appears when people recognize they have been given a rare opportunity to see someone with fresh eyes. Then the person who had revealed everything smiled gently and said something that no one expected. The evidence cleared a name, but it also revealed a heart. Those words lingered. They reminded everyone that innocence is not only proven by facts. It is often reflected through quiet consistency, steady character, and kindness that continues even when it goes unnoticed. Some lowered their eyes once more, not from embarrassment alone, but from a sincere desire to understand how they could have listened more carefully from the beginning. Others began remembering conversations where your calm responses had never matched the assumptions surrounding you. Every memory now carried a meaning they had completely missed before. And just when it seemed the entire truth had finally been uncovered, someone at the far end of the room quietly reached into a folder no one had opened. Inside was one final message. It had never been read aloud. It had never been shared. And the moment everyone realized who had written it, every heartbeat in the room seemed to pause, because they knew those next few words would complete the story in a way no one could have predicted. The room had already witnessed more truth than anyone thought possible, yet the unopened message resting quietly inside that folder carried a different kind of weight. It was not dramatic because of what it looked like. It was powerful because of who had written it, someone whose voice had been absent from every conversation until this very moment. As the envelope was carefully unfolded, even the smallest sound seemed to disappear. No one wanted to interrupt what was about to be revealed. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you, and the final lines of this message would leave every heart changed in ways they never expected. The handwriting was simple. There was nothing extraordinary about it at first glance. Yet the first sentence immediately shifted every expression in the room. It did not begin with blame. It did not begin with excuses. It began with honesty. The writer explained that they had watched misunderstanding grow little by little, believing someone else would eventually correct it. They admitted they had mistaken silence for wisdom, never realizing that silence can sometimes allow the wrong story to become the only story people hear. Every passing day made speaking feel more difficult, until what should have been a simple truth became a burden carried for far too long. As each paragraph was read aloud, people no longer looked at one another. They looked inward. They began remembering moments when they had chosen convenience instead of curiosity. They recalled conversations where they accepted conclusions before seeking understanding. They realized that the truth had never been completely hidden. It had simply been waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Don't skip. Because the next realization reached every heart at exactly the same time. The message described a moment that no one else had noticed. It was a quiet afternoon when your character had been tested without anyone realizing it. There were no witnesses looking for something remarkable. There was no audience waiting to applaud. Yet you chose kindness when no recognition was coming. You chose patience when frustration would have been easier. You walked away carrying peace instead of proving a point. The writer confessed, "That was the day I knew the story everyone believed could not possibly be true." Those words settled gently into the silence. No one questioned them. No one searched for another explanation. Because every piece of evidence, every memory, every forgotten detail had already been leading to this exact moment. A quiet realization spread across every face. Your innocence had not suddenly appeared today. It had been present from the very beginning. Today was simply the day everyone else finally caught up to it. For some, tears returned, not from sadness alone, but from relief. Relief that the truth had finally found its place. Relief that your name no longer carried the weight of misunderstanding. Relief that what had been broken by assumptions could now begin to heal through understanding. Then someone spoke softly. "If we had listened sooner, everything would have been different." No one argued. Because everyone felt the truth behind those words. Yet the person reading the message did not stop there. Near the bottom of the page was one final paragraph that had never been expected. It wasn't written about the past. It was written about the future. The writer believed that one day people would no longer remember the false story first. Instead, they would remember the quiet strength you showed while carrying it. They would remember your steady character when circumstances could have changed you. They would remember that truth never needed to rush because it was never afraid of time. As the final sentence echoed through the room, every lingering doubt disappeared. But before anyone could close the folder, a small folded note slipped from the back of the envelope onto the floor. No one knew it had been there. No one had mentioned it. And when someone carefully picked it up and noticed whose name was written across the front, every eye widened once again, because they realized the story was not over. The greatest revelation had been waiting inside the smallest piece of paper all along. No one reached for the small folded note immediately. For a few quiet moments, it remained exactly where it had landed, as though even time understood that some truths deserve to be approached with care. Every person in the room felt the same unspoken thought: if everything had changed already, what could possibly still be left to discover? Yet deep inside, they sensed this final note was different. It was not another piece of evidence. It was something even more personal. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you, and this final discovery carries the heart of the entire story. The note was opened slowly. Its words were few. Its meaning was immeasurable. There were no complicated explanations. No long arguments. No attempt to convince anyone of anything. Instead, it contained a simple reflection written long before anyone knew this day would come. It read like someone who had quietly watched your journey from a distance. It spoke of your patience. It spoke of your consistency. It spoke of the remarkable way you continued moving forward even when very few people truly understood what you were carrying. The room became still once again. Not because anyone doubted those words, but because everyone suddenly realized they had all witnessed parts of your character without ever putting those pieces together. One remembered how you offered kindness without expecting recognition. Another remembered how you never answered misunderstanding with bitterness. Someone else recalled a moment when you encouraged another person while quietly carrying your own unanswered questions. Individually, those memories once seemed ordinary. Together, they became extraordinary. Don't skip. Because the next realization touched every heart at once. The person holding the note gently smiled and said, "Perhaps the greatest evidence was never hidden in documents at all. Perhaps it was hidden in the life this person chose to live every single day." No one interrupted. No one searched for another explanation. For the first time, everyone understood that facts had cleared your name. But your character had earned their respect. The atmosphere no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. There was no celebration. No dramatic applause. Only quiet gratitude that the truth had finally reached the people who needed to hear it. Then something unexpected happened. One after another, people began sharing moments they had never spoken about before. Someone admitted they had once doubted you but secretly admired your calm. Another confessed they had almost defended you months earlier but lacked the courage to speak. Another remembered a conversation where your honesty had quietly stood out, even though they failed to recognize its importance at the time. Each story added another thread until a completely different picture emerged. The story everyone once believed was no longer the story anyone remembered. Now they remembered your patience, your quiet strength, your unwavering integrity, your willingness to let time reveal what arguments never could. The person who had revealed everything looked around the room one last time before speaking. The truth did more than restore a reputation today. It reminded every one of us how easily assumptions can become louder than understanding, and how powerful it is when someone chooses grace instead of resentment. Those words lingered long after they were spoken. People left that place carrying more than new information. They carried a new perspective. From that day forward, whenever your name was mentioned, it was no longer followed by uncertainty. It was followed by respect. Yet as everyone prepared to leave, the oldest person in the room quietly stepped toward the window and whispered something so softly that only a few nearby could hear. There is one part of this story that still hasn't been told. Every conversation stopped. Every step paused. Because the expression on their face revealed they weren't looking back at the past anymore. They were looking toward something that was only just beginning. The room had almost emptied, yet no one truly wanted to leave. It was as though every person sensed that the journey had reached a place of peace, but not its destination. The oldest voice in the room remained quiet for a while, gazing beyond the window as if remembering something that had been waiting for the right time to be spoken. Then, with calm certainty, they turned back and said, "What happened today was never only about proving innocence. It was about revealing the kind of person you became while no one was watching." Those words settled gently into every heart. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you, and this final chapter begins where everyone thought the story had already ended. For a long moment, no one replied. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they were discovering that the greatest lessons often arrive after every question has already been answered. The older voice continued. When people believed the wrong story, you could have answered with anger. You could have demanded recognition. You could have allowed disappointment to define your future. But instead, you continued planting kindness where bitterness could have grown. Everyone reflected on those words. They remembered moments that had once seemed too ordinary to matter. A gentle smile you offered to someone who expected nothing from you. A quiet act of encouragement that asked for no praise. A decision to walk away peacefully when proving yourself would have been easier. Those memories now shined brighter than any evidence ever could. Don't skip. Because the next realization became the one no one would ever forget. Someone quietly stood and admitted, "I spent so much time looking for proof that I forgot to look at the person standing right in front of me." The room remained silent. Not an empty silence. A grateful one. It was the silence that appears when people recognize they have been given another chance to see someone clearly. One by one, people began speaking, not to explain themselves, but to acknowledge what they had finally learned. I judged too quickly. I listened before I understood. I confused confidence with truth. Every sentence carried humility instead of regret. And with each honest admission, the distance that misunderstanding had created slowly disappeared. Then the oldest person smiled gently. Truth has a beautiful habit, they said. It never rushes, but it never loses its way. Those words lingered long after they were spoken. Everyone realized that the evidence had not changed who you were. It had simply allowed others to discover the person you had been all along. As the evening drew to a close, people no longer spoke about the misunderstanding. They spoke about your resilience. They spoke about your quiet character. They spoke about the steady way you continued forward without allowing difficult moments to define your heart. Your story had become something entirely different. It was no longer remembered as the story of someone who was wrongly judged. It became the story of someone whose integrity remained steady until the truth naturally found its voice. Just before everyone stepped outside, the oldest person reached into their pocket and unfolded a tiny piece of paper they had carried for years. Smiling softly, they placed it on the table and said, "I kept this because I believed there would come a day when everyone would finally understand." The paper contained only one simple sentence. When the full truth arrives, people will not remember how long it was hidden. They will remember the quiet strength of the one who never stopped living with honesty. No one spoke after reading it. No one needed to. Because every heart in that room already knew the story would be carried far beyond those walls, not as a tale of accusation, but as a reminder that patience, integrity, and quiet courage leave a lasting mark that time can never erase. And somewhere, beyond what anyone could see, another chapter was already beginning, not to revisit the past, but to open a future where your name would inspire trust before anyone ever asked for an explanation. There was no applause when everyone finally walked away. No grand ending. Only a quiet understanding that some of the most meaningful victories never need to announce themselves. The room slowly emptied, but the truth remained behind like a gentle light that would continue shining long after every conversation had ended. It had done its work. It had restored what misunderstanding could never truly take away. Days passed. Something began changing in ways no one expected. People who had once spoken with certainty now spoke with care. They no longer repeated stories they had never questioned. Instead, they paused, listened, and searched for understanding before forming conclusions. Your journey had quietly become a lesson they would carry into every future conversation. Don't skip. Because something important is waiting for you, and the final realization is closer than it appears. One morning, someone who had been present that day crossed paths with another person who had never heard the full story. Instead of repeating the old version, they smiled gently and said, "You should know who this person really is before you believe anything else." Those simple words carried more power than anyone realized. The story was no longer spreading through misunderstanding. Now it was traveling through truth. One conversation became two. Two became many. Not because anyone was trying to rewrite history, but because honesty has a quiet way of reaching hearts that are finally ready to receive it. The people who once doubted you found themselves remembering different moments now. They remembered your patience, Your calm responses. Your willingness to keep moving forward without demanding recognition. The qualities they once overlooked had become the very things they admired most. One evening, the person who first revealed the hidden truth stood alone for a while, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. They quietly whispered, "I thought I was protecting one person's name, but I was really protecting everyone's opportunity to learn." Those words echoed with quiet wisdom. Because this journey had never belonged to only one individual. It reminded every heart that truth is strongest when it is carried with humility. Stay till the end. There is one final moment that completes everything. Not long afterward, a small gathering took place. Nothing formal. Nothing extraordinary. Just a few people sitting together, speaking honestly for the first time in a very long while. Someone looked toward your empty chair and smiled. "It's amazing," they said softly. "The evidence proved innocence. But character earned trust." No one disagreed. Because every person there had witnessed that transformation for themselves. Another voice gently added, "Some people spend their lives trying to change how others see them. This person simply stayed true to who they were. And eventually the truth did the speaking." A peaceful silence followed. Not because there were no more words, but because every important word had already been spoken. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, everyone realized the story they would remember forever was never about accusation. It was about grace. It was about patience. It was about choosing integrity even when recognition seemed far away. And perhaps the greatest gift of all. The people who once searched for evidence no longer searched for mistakes. They searched for goodness. Because your journey had quietly reminded them that every person deserves to be understood before they are judged. As the final light faded from the sky, the oldest person smiled once more and spoke the last words anyone expected to hear. The truth did not arrive to defeat anyone. It arrived to heal everyone. No one added another sentence. None was needed. The story had come full circle. Not with triumph over others, but with peace that reached every heart willing to receive it. And from that day forward, whenever your name was spoken, it carried something far greater than innocence. It carried quiet honor, lasting respect, and the gentle reminder that truth may walk slowly, but it never loses its way.